Yo, it's a fairy. Hey, this is another podcast with me and Dr. Ed. We're actually going to start interviewing random people in the archery and rifle business. And our first guest was our bone doc. Second guest here is Cliff Gray. He's a well known Western guy, mostly an elk guy. This conversation goes all over the place. Some historical information about Ed himself, which is super interesting. Lots of discussion around ballistics, shooting, lots of rifle talk and bullet discussion that all kind of ties together with how do we get critters on the ground in a hurry and not have to chase them around. It's like a lethality discussion. So here's a picture of Cliff's YouTube channel. They follow him, super good dude, well thought out, and doesn't really have a beef. He's just like, I'm trying to learn everything I can. It's refreshing. Here we go. All right, welcome back, everybody. This will be our this is our second podcast with a guest. So Cliff, Ed and I are going to start doing this around the world and talking to folks that either I've podcasted with or folks that interest, our bailiwick. And you have a quite significant background in the Western game, elk guiding, et cetera, et cetera. And we wanted to talk to you about some of that stuff around just lethality. Whether that is arrows, we don't have to stay on that topic. Mr. Ashby, by the way, was a beta tester for Barnes before it was a thing. He's I've got one of his guns. How many animals did you say that gun's killed?
Well, I know I did 30 kudu with it because I did 30 with each of the 330 calibers. I thought that was appropriate. 30, 30, 30, 30.
How many animals do you think it's taken, though? 1,000?
Oh, no. I took the one that went up into the thousands was when we were doing the 22 bullets with the Hornet.
Goodness.
And I shot over 2,000 Impala in a cull with the Hornet.
As you said, Cliff, he got to have a lot of fun.
Yeah. No, for sure.
You don't get to do that very often. So, just to start off with some excitement, before we started the podcast, Cliff was shocked at the bipolar reaction of the audience. And apparently, I'm either a love you or hate you guy, and I'm either the teeter-totter kind of goes like this, and he's not in the archery business like. So he was kind of surprised then.
Yeah, well, dude, I was insane. I knew you were kind of controversial, Troy, but the content before I talked to you, I had followed some of your stuff just in general. But then when I knew we were going to talk, I went through and, prep myself some by kind of looking at some of your recent stuff and that sort of thing. Which would be appropriate just to get like the modern context. So I knew there was like some controversy, but I've never been like in the weeds on archery stuff. Outside of, elk hunting tactics when it comes to archery stuff, that my content pretty much stops there on the archery front, on elk front. It's more just like tactics, how, calling stuff, calling setups, that sort of thing. I don't dive into the weeds of archery, setups really. And the reality is, I think part of that is that I haven't played with it that much in my life. I've bow hunted myself a lot. I've guided dozens and dozens of archery elk guys, but I'm not one where that's something I'm changing all the time. You know what I mean? Like I haven't spent the last 20 years of my life like A/B testing, broadheads and arrow weights and bows. Like it just hasn't been a part of my thing. Anyways, that's my long way of saying that I haven't really been in that world. And when we
stay
did
out
that,
of it.
yeah, well, I just like what I would call Troy the barbell reaction, like people that they literally I would almost describe it, and I hope this doesn't like offend you, man, but I would describe it as they hate you as an individual, which like that's a really weird kind of guttural response to just like a topic where you're just diving into things, and then you got guys that are very much like, hey, I follow that stuff and it's for sure making a giant difference, but not a lot of in between, man.
No,
Hate
there isn't a lot of
or
in between.
Yeah,
Yeah,
hate
it's
or
a
love.
really
So
interesting thing to. We were talking earlier. I'm a marketing and sales guy, and if I were to stand back and look at what has happened with the ferry There must have been something missing or whatever. I don't know. I can't do the math on it. I can't. I can't
Yeah,
figure out
yeah,
why I'm talking to anybody.
right.
Why you and I ever got on a podcast together. I can't figure it out. But here we are with Dr. Ed. And I think I want to open up with Cliff, when we were talking before we started recording, you said you had a couple of things you were wondering about, questions for Ed that you might have, or thoughts or whatever. So
Oh,
fire
well,
away.
yeah, man, and it's gonna pop us off of the archery topic right off the bat, man.
Or
But
whatever you want to talk about. We
yeah,
don't care.
sure.
Guns,
No,
whatever.
no, I mean, this is probably like jumping right into like I guess personal questions for Ed. But when I read the
Go
Natal
ahead.
stu yeah, dude, when I've read the Natal study, I've read all your work. You're just talking about shooting 1,000 Impala in some rifle testing. Dude, I gotta hear. So, Ed, just to preface this, I get questioned all the time from like people who follow me. They're like, Cliff, like you've been able to guide so much in in your life. I kind of had a more standard. My dad was an outfitter, Ed, but for a period of time, I went to college, I went and got a master's degree, and then I came back to guiding after working in kind of the financial world for a little bit. So I get people asking me all the time, like, well, how did you do it? Like, how did you figure out how to get so much opportunity in the hunting world? And I answer them to the extent that I can. But then when I look at your stuff, I'm like, this guy's at a next level. Like he's obviously sacrificed a lot in his life to accomplish his stuff, but I want to hear the story. Like what I guess how did you finagle yourself into all this hunting opportunity?
Well, I, you know, I after I graduated school, I was out in private practice for a few months and got drafted and got allocated to the Air Force. And it, my first duty assignment, they put me in Wichita, Kansas, at McConnell, and actually, there's some pretty decent fishing and hunting there, which I didn't realize till I got there.
Sure.
But that base was a TAC base, Tactical Air Command. And I'd been there about 16, 18 months, 16 months, something like that. And the base was in the process of changing over from Tactical Air Command to Strategic Air Command. And if you don't know anything about the military, there is great rivalry between the different branches.
Sure.
And TAC did not want to leave any of their people in place for SAC.
I got you.
So the hospital commander came down and, we said, we don't want to leave anybody here, but, you've got several months to go and, you don't have time enough that we can reassign you somewhere. So what would it take to get you to re-up so we can move you? And I said, if you can get me to Alaska, I'll re-up. And in less than 24 hours, I had written orders for Eielson at Fairbanks, Alaska. And so I did a tour up there. And when I had to leave there, they gave us choices of places. And so I went to Davis Monthan at Tucson. And because I had hunted some out in that area and in New Mexico and Colorado.
Sure.
And, as a sideline, I was there in Tucson when C.J. McElroy founded Safari Club International. And I was in the founding chapter
Yeah, okay.
of Safari Club International, which I subsequently, a few years later, dropped out of because I didn't like the way they were doing some things, their internal politics.
Gotcha.
But at the end of that, or even before I reached the end of my assignment there, the people at Eielson made what's called a by name request to get me reassigned up there. So then I went back to Alaska and did another tour up there. And at the end of that tour, by that time I had almost 10 years in the Air Force. And they they called me and said, well, we've got to reassign you. You've reached the point in your career, you need to go one of the major bases. And they gave me a choice of 3 places, which is typically what they do. But they were all in big cities. And I said, Sure. They said, well, you're that point in your career, you've got to go. And I said, no, I don't. So I stopped right there in the middle of an exam on a patient, said, I'll be back in just a few minutes, and walked over to personnel and put in my separation papers. Yeah. Because I had already investigated the public health service. It's a uniform service too. It's the 7th uniform service that nobody ever thinks about. That's the reason we have a surgeon general. He is actually military rank. But I knew that they ran the Indian Health Service. And I knew that I could get in there probably. So that's what I did, worked on it, got a transfer over to Indian Health Service, in the public health service, and went up to just outside of Red Lake. I was assigned at Red Lake. I had bought a property out on a lake where I was the only year-round resident, and I was about
sounds like where you live now,
300 yards off the reservation.
Oh God, that's where Ed lives now. Okay. He's the only permanent resident in the middle of goddamn nowhere.
Yep. Well, I was up there, and so I was there 11 years. I worked part of it at Red Lake, and then a friend of mine was the area director, not the area director, the area chief of eye care, and he moved, went down to Navajo country. And so I went into his position. I didn't have to move or anything. Bemidji's only 20 something miles from my house. And that's where in the federal building there's where the office was. But that covered a 7-state region. So I spent a lot of time going places. And if you go places right time of the year, you can work it out where you plan these very economical trips where you got weekends away in these places where you can hunt and fish.
Yeah. Man, Ed, it's so during. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to talk over you, Troy.
How'd you end up in Africa?
Well, I'll go ahead with the whole story. I wanted to live in Africa and hunt when I was 9 years old.
Yeah, we all did. You did it.
I read every old African hunting book I could.
Right.
I'm sure that's where I got my whole education. That's the only reason I ever learned to read.
Sure.
And after I did Bemidji, I was chief of eye care for the Federal Bureau of Prisons nationwide program for my last 4 years. But I started going to Africa in 1975 was my first trip. And my guide was Gordon Cormack, and Gordon became one of my greatest friends of my whole lifetime. And I made several trips back between then and when I retired. So by the time I was ready to retire, I had already lined up with Gordon to do my apprenticeship for PH under him. And I knew people all through Southern Africa. And so I liquidated everything I had in North America, and I moved to Africa. I gave away all my mounted trophies, some to friends, some to a Boy Scout museum. The only thing I kept here in the States was I had a few paintings that fortunately I did, because some of them turned out to be worth a fortune now. and we've auctioned those off for the foundation and my library. Other than that, I took everything with me to Africa, and I devoted myself totally to hunting. I think the first 4 years I averaged about 300 days a year hunting. And, I was either out guiding somebody or hunting for myself.
And this was this was after you'd been a medical doctor for how many years? Like how many years did you practice
But
as a
yeah,
doctor?
eye doctor. Yeah, I was with the government for 24 years,
Yeah, and then
and
after that you went to Africa.
yeah.
You know, I have to ask, and I guess it's very personal, but when you made that transition, was there did you have like any external pressure that people, people around you that were like, Ed,
Oh
you're
yeah,
you're being
yeah. Everybody thought
insane.
it was nuts, but
Like,
they all came over to visit me and hunt with me.
yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, yeah,
Right?
yeah. No, that's the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why I had to ask because you go through that. And I think it's such an interesting conversation, Ed, because basically what you're telling me, dude, and I can relate, is you had this goal as a kid, and I'm guessing you grew up hunting a bunch,
Oh
but
yeah.
like every decision you made career wise, like hunting was a component of it, and for
Well, it was
better,
actually a major component.
yeah, major part of it. And I've it's been the same for me personally, man. And I think that's very hard for people who haven't made like I don't want to call it a sacrifice, but made that adjustment in every choice. They can't really relate. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
they'll look at I think a lot of people will look at you, Ed, and be like, "Well, he just got lucky. He just like by circumstance he was able to fall into that." I'm like, "Nah, he probably, you know,
no, no, you work at it. There's no luck involved,
yeah,
and the
yeah.
cost to me has been enormous.
Oh yeah.
Not only what I put into the study, which I added that up in the 1990s, and I had already spent over $300,000 just on equipment and testing, not
Right.
travel, not anything else involved with it, just that component of it. And then, of course, I was based in Zimbabwe. That's where I had my house and everything. And Mugabe took all of that. And I had 24 hours to get out of the country. So I got out with my rifles, which I had to bring out, and my binoculars and a change of clothes. And essentially, that and my retirement check is all I had left in the world. Everything I'd, had here in the States, when I liquidated, I invested it all in Africa. And they
Right.
took it all with no compensation. So I came back, just for a short period of time to the States to regroup, figure out what to do. And one of the fellows that guided over there, Mike Aldersey, lived down in South Australia. And he said, "Well, why don't you come down and look at Australia as a place to go do stuff?" So I scrounged up, a ticket and went down there and spent 3 months. He found me a used vehicle to buy. And I took off on that vehicle and I toured Australia for 3 months, looking everything over. And one of my stops there was a friend of his. Now he's in South Australia, but this friend of his named Dave Lindner is up in what's actually Kakadu Park. He's a retired chief game ranger of Kakadu Park up there, but he runs a program up there that they call the Buffalo Farm. Now this is about a 7 by 7 mile square of property that has been fenced in and then cross fenced. And he's investigating how many buffalo you can have because he'd been part of that project to eliminate the buffalo in Australia, and they couldn't eliminate them because it's impossible in that terrain. Even shooting from helicopters, they couldn't do it. So he was trying to determine what the carrying capacity of the range was without causing so much environmental change that it affected the
I got you.
ecology.
Trying to kind of
And
figure
so
out
we
like
have to
what
take
would be
about 500 buffalo a year off of the buffalo farm. And I got up there and I got talking to him, and he's more of a loner than me. Really out in the middle of nowhere. Uh, but we hit it off. And I got talking to him about what I was doing with, had been doing with the testing in Africa with bows and arrows, and he was fascinated by it. And he said, "Well, if you come back next year, and when we're taking buffalo off, we'll do some testing." And I said, "Sounds like a plan to me." Of course, there's no season over there.
Sure.
And the first time I went, it was in December, which is the middle of summer in the Northern Territory. And I'll never do that again.
Pretty
It
hot, huh?
was hot, humid, and bugs like I have never seen. So after that, every year I would go up for 3 months in usually June, July, August, and test. And of course, I was having to do everything myself. I could do testing on one buffalo about every 3 days. The other 2 days were devoted to collecting, recording all of the data, getting it into the computer, uh, sharpening broadheads, replacing damaged arrows, building new arrow setups. I carried a bunch of stuff to do that for new things that we decided we wanted to test after finding out what we would find each year. And that first June, July, August, which was the second year I went up there, I carried 33 dozen setup arrows to test. So it was a massive project. But I lived for virtually no cost,
Right.
for 7 years in Australia, and I saved as much as I possibly could out of my retirement checks. And when I hurt my back, which was in the fall in New Zealand, I had enough money to make a down payment on this place.
I got you.
And so it's not elaborate, but hey, when you've lived in the bush for that many years, it don't take much to be pretty. Feel like, man, you're on
Be
top of
pretty
the world.
comfortable. Well, what I gotta ask Ed, like, what was it during that journey, man? Was it like what was driving you for the most part? I'm sure it was a combination of things, but was it like trying to actually answer the questions? Was it trying to, selfishly just become a better hunter? Or was it just the thrill of hunting all the time? What
Well,
was
it,
it?
it 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 was some of all those. The thrill of hunting. I'm a stalking hunter, and I never got over the thrill of the stalk, whether I killed something or not.
Sure.
Sometimes it's more fun to get in really close on an animal and just do one of those mental gotchas
Yeah, oh
and
yeah.
leave.
Yeah.
But once I did luck into being able to do the tall study. But once I had that, I had so many unanswered questions. And so I just felt like I just had to keep going with it. I wanted to know those answers. I wanted to know how we cure those problems that showed up in the tall study. That's the only study that's ever been done where we bow hunted the animals, but were backed up with a rifle so that we could look at both successful and non-successful hits. And we had veterinarians that could also dissect the animals for us and give us their opinion of, was it a lethal shot? Was it not a lethal shot? What would it have taken to make it a lethal shot? And it dispelled one of the things that always comes up. People always talk about, they lose an animal. Yeah, I made a bad hit.
Right.
The overwhelming, not even close, reason for a failure to be lethal with an arrow is lack of penetration. Nothing else was even close. And of course, the lack of penetration occurred for a number of reasons. It could be damaged broadhead. It could be hitting a hard object and not being able to penetrate through the bone. But assuming that's the hard object. And I had, because archery, there was no archery equipment available in Africa, which is one of the reasons they asked me to come help them with that, which I did on my own dime. They didn't pay me to do the Natal study.
You got to hunt a lot, though. Come on,
I
man.
got to shoot 154 animals in 30 days and the second rhino.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there was some payoff.
Good trade.
Cliff,
Yeah, I thought it was a fair trade.
I can confirm with you that there's something wrong with us. I have the same. Ed warned me when I first met him. He said, "You go down this rabbit hole, it never stops." Because if you keep your mind open and don't decide what the outcome should be, 6 things come out of every shot when you're actually doing stuff. You go, but what? And you have to literally write them down.
Right.
He's got a list this long of stuff that we're still trying to figure out.
I don't know, 4 or 5 pages, single space pages of things that got to be tested.
There's just something wrong with us people that always say why. Like, why?
Yeah. I think it's within the hunting context. I think it's in particularly problematic because it's really hard to study stuff. You know what I mean? Like one thing that people will say to me about Dr. Ashby's stuff and your stuff, Troy, is they'll say, well, it's not applicable to elk. Because elk, the reality is, and I'm very elk centric in my world, Troy, but the reality is elk from a marketing perspective, like if you want to get into the economics of the Western hunting business, it's the only thing that matters.
Yeah.
Elk are the only thing that matters, from how much money spent on the hunts, all the gear is oriented toward, like, that's really what we're talking about. And so you get all the elk hunters will say, well, it's not applicable. You hear that a lot because, it's either African animals or Troy shoots from a tree stand at a set distance. You've heard all the stuff I'm talking about.
Right.
The problem is, and to me, this is all new and interesting to learn about. I'm not saying that you guys have 100% of the answers, but I don't think people realize that there is no alternative in the elk world. There's nobody that's out there, as far as I know, that is able to go kill even 50 bull elk, like in a wild environment, and then analyze the shots. I mean, even amongst guides, the reality is like, I mean, looking back on like all the hunts I've guided, like, sure, I could have been somebody that collected maybe some useful data, but I didn't. And all the guides that I know and all the elk hunters I know that have killed a lot of elk or been around a lot of archery killed elk, they don't really have the data. Like, we just, you'd
have to be wired that way, though, Cliff.
You'd have to like be collecting.
I say it in jest, but there's something wrong with people like me and Ed. Like, there's something wrong with me. I want to know the amount of garbage crap I try to figure out catching bass. Bitty nuances like hooks and, I mean, it's little bitty differences that put 2 more in the boat.
Yeah,
and that's what's wrong with me is, you'd have to be curious, and secondarily, it's illegal to test on elk.
Yeah, that's a big part of it too.
I mean, that's why I chose the pigs. There are no rules, and I can set up
pigs about the only thing in North America you can test on.
Right.
So
yeah,
I just took it to another step in the modern world before I knew Ed, and said, well, I got all these pigs. It's totally legal to kill them. The state doesn't even care what you do with them.
Yeah, in terms of waste or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
And I can shoot them at the same distance, and the feeders give me the opportunity to put them in front of me a lot.
Right.
Like, if you stalked them, you'd be 10% successful. You wouldn't be able to shoot a lot, right?
Yeah.
So,
yep.
Interestingly, Cliff, I don't know if you've heard this. Ed has 650, whatever. How many live kills do you have recorded?
631.
Okay, I should know that.
Including the 4 non-recovered.
I'm not a very good student, but the penetration in his 630 kills is better on the live animals than it is on the ones on the ground.
Yeah, I kept parallel databases so I could compare when I look at same arrow setups, what I was getting in testing compared to what I got in actual hunting.
Right.
And So
That's
I
the
can go
kind of
back
stuff.
you do. I get more penetration on a live animal than on the average. We're looking at average penetrations, average, mean, median, uh, than on the test shot setup. So I always, once I began to realize that, I had a lot of confidence in, okay, if I test it on freshly downed animals first and know what it's going to do there, it is going to perform at least that well or better on a live animal.
Right. Is it
So
like a rigor mortis thing, a positional thing, or what?
yeah,
What?
it's a combination. It's rigor
Yeah.
mortis. And when we were talking with a bone guy the other day, he said it's not the weight bearing of the animal standing up. It's the pull, the tension of the muscle attachments to the bone.
Oh, I
So
gotcha.
when you crack that bone, the muscles help rip it apart on a live animal.
Oh, I see, because they're under tension. It makes
They're under
sense.
tension.
I
Yeah,
was
yeah.
shocked by that. I was surprised because we asked him
Yeah,
that.
I wasn't expecting that answer either.
That's why we did. We interviewed a guy who works for some osteo doctors and intentionally breaks bones or takes broken ones and fixes them, right?
Right.
And he said, "Oh yeah, it's very simple. They're under load, and especially deer and stuff that jump." He said they start to flex, and he said you have no idea how strong your muscles are attached to the bone. It hits it, and if it cracks, your muscles tear it apart.
Right.
Because we're
Yeah,
trying
that
to
makes I
Makes you
explain,
wonder about all those arrow setups that don't breach bone.
right?
oh, like when they're shooting them into yeah, yeah, no, I gotcha. It's very so one question I have when you say that the overwhelming issue was penetration, Ed, do you so I guess one observation I noticed with elk is that if they're hit in the diaphragm, like I to me, track an elk, it seems to be, or just hunting with guys, archery hunting elk, that if it penetrates through one lung into the other lung, but it only goes into the far lung, this
Yeah,
far, still a dead elk. And it basically, I mean, I've never I'm not, you
but
know,
he's going to go a ways.
yeah, but the thing is like, and this could just be biased in what I've observed. I'm not gonna know, like if when I'm archery hunting with a guy, if he shoots the bull and the bull's dead in 80 yards or the bull's dead in 120 yards or 130 yards, like it's not gonna register as really any different to
Yeah,
me.
right, right, right. I
So
got you.
I think over time, I haven't noticed a difference in those two shots from like an elk recovery standpoint. But am I wrong, or like what's your perspective on that?
Well, the one I can give you a good example that's specific to elk.
Sure.
Steve Hall, who is currently the director of Texas Parks and Wildlife Hunter Education Program. He's fixed to retire, and he's actually coming on to the board of our foundation. Well, actually, he's on the board now. We officially put him on the board. Um, he lost 4 or 5 elk, and it was just on the point of he was never going to bow hunt elk again. And through a series of real coincidences, uh, he and who's Rob Nielsen, president of the foundation, ran into each other or got hooked up with each other somehow. And Rob got to talking about, our foundation stuff and so forth, and built him up a set of arrows. And since then, he has killed 4 elk with complete pass throughs, and all have dropped in sight. That's the big difference that you get. Well, that's what I like. I like for them to drop in sight.
Sure.
And you're not supposed to say this thing because everybody says, "Oh, you mustn't do that." But I shot my buffalo arrows on everything, squirrels, rabbits. It didn't matter. I shot that same arrow setup,
Right.
and on light game, I shot to break the shoulders down
Sure.
and put them
Which
down in their tracks. There was no trailing involved.
it's funny. It's funny you say that, Ed, because I get in this. It's an analogous debate. In the rifle hunting world, there's a huge debate about burgers. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
match shooting match bullets, burgers, whatever. Those bullets with those type of terminal ballistics. And one thing that I've noticed with them, I've guided a lot of mountain goat hunts, and when a guy asks me what to shoot at mountain goats, a lot of time, like my preference is burgers because when they hit them from, in that, it's always like the same distance, right? We're getting 250 to 400 yards from them. And almost always when they shoot, there's like, if that goat goes 30 yards, he could become unrecoverable. So I need him like
Yeah.
right there. It's like I
Yeah.
can't, like, there's a
Yeah.
bit,
He
it's
can
like,
go over the cliff.
yeah, it's a unique situation. Like I need him to die right there.
Yep.
Um, and there's just, I'm sure, I mean, you're very familiar with it, but some people hate burgers, some people don't. But I'm like, look, in this situation, it matters that they're just dead right there. And at least anecdotally, they almost always do that. And I tell guys to shoot into the shoulder. So I guess what I'm saying is I don't really see why that's all that controversial. If you're shooting an arrow on an
Yeah,
animal
because
that,
most people are shooting arrows that won't break the bone.
right.
So when you say shoot something to break down his shoulders, they say, you can't do that. Arrows won't break bones.
I have a
Right.
question, and I'm way out of my bailiwick now because he was a Barnes tester. What burger are you talking about? Are you talking about shooting a copper
Burger
bullet that
bullet.
high penetration, like a Barnes super copper bullet that goes blowing through them?
No, no, no. I'm talking about shooting like a light jacketed burger that blows up.
No
And
kidding.
a lot of times you don't even get an exit. So the opposite.
No, that's
You
what I
know what I
thought.
mean?
For
Yeah.
that particular situation
In that
on
particular
that
situation,
particular animal,
yes,
yeah.
I'm a fan of them. And we can get into that debate. I'd
No,
love
no,
to
no.
hear it because you
Dude,
guys
you've done
might
it a
have.
lot. I haven't. It's
Yeah,
just now I
yeah.
have why questions.
Yeah, and I don't want to get like, well, I mean, I mean,
You
are you
may. I'm writing all kind of notes down now, Cliff.
Um, what I have noticed, and this is gonna like take us off on an aside here, and I don't know, Ed, have you shot like have you done much analysis on like, copper monolithic bullets versus burgers? Are you familiar with
Well,
that
I
debate?
haven't done anything with the burgers,
Yeah.
but I can relate something back to you. I don't know if you're old enough to have ever seen them used. The original Nosler petition, not the one they make now, but the original, I think was the finest hunting bullet ever made. Now, it had a copro nickel jacket that was actually machine turned out of a solid billet. And the front core would blow up like a varmint bullet.
Okay.
And then it would fold back, and it was just like a flat nose solid. And penetration was enormous.
Yeah.
Uh, and I did some things that people say you can't do or should never do. I killed a brown bear with a 6 millimeter Donaldson International and an 85 grain old style Nosler. Hit him in the right hip, and it came out uh, between his shoulder and his neck. And
Yeah.
he was he was a reasonable sized brown bear and was soaking wet. Was swimming the river, and I shot him when he got out of the river on the other side.
Yeah.
In my first brown bear, I shot with a 130 grain old Nosler and a 270.
Yeah.
Um, and I've taken almost everything in North America with a 270 with that 130 grain old style Nosler. But
Sure.
then I didn't do a lot of long range shooting.
Yeah, yeah, and that's where a lot of this I mean, that's one of the reasons why there's a little bit of a push on these burgers, I think, is that, they still technically perform at much lower, impact
Mm-hmm.
velocities. So that's why you got a lot of long range guys shooting them, and then they got like crazy high ballistic coefficients, right? Which everybody's addicted to
Yeah,
if you're
nowadays,
yeah, and if
my point is just like with the bow hunters. Uh, there are a lot of really good 1,000 yard rifles now, but there are darn few 1,000 yard shooters. And I
oh
used to
yeah,
shoot
absolutely.
competition, so
Yeah, 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 yeah. No, I totally agree with that. And I
Is
think
the
that
so Cliff, just to I'm sitting here with all kind of whys. I apologize.
No, you're good.
Is the burger's not an elk bullet?
Yeah, no, I mean, I've honestly, I've never personally killed a elk with a burger, but my two like loner rifles, I typically will have hunters shoot a burger out of them. Part of that is they're both Gunworks rifles, and I got set up with them. I was testing them for the guys, and then I was using it with my clients a lot, and they were reloading for me, which
Mm-hmm.
like with all the shit I got going on in life, like
Everything's
I'm
dialed.
all
Right.
about it. Like, and so I've seen those with those rifles. I think we've killed like a dozen elk, maybe 15 elk, and I've always had great performance. But I guess like wiring it back into this conversation about penetration is they almost never exit. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
that's where if for some, well, with a rifle you have more flexibility because they can't
Yeah,
jump
yeah.
the bullet. But you know, the old Texas heart shot, you need a lot of penetration unless you hit the spine or break down the pelvic girdle.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
it's a long way from the back of the animal to the front of the animal.
Yeah, and that's the thing is that well, all this stuff I find very difficult, and I hate to say it, but I think that's why it's very conducive to like marketing and these industries kind of swelling up is that like I've shot burgers at or I've had clients kill 12, 15 elk with burgers. You know what I mean, Troy? So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and every single one of them has I would consider like good performance. Most of them I'm carving out the slug or the remaining like jacket really on the far side of the animal
Mm-hmm.
against the hide. Like that hide just grabs it as it like falls into it, you know?
Sure.
So I don't get penetration, but the elk are dead within 50 yards or whatever, including if they're honestly gut shot. Like if they're single lunged and blown out the guts or something,
Mm-hmm.
the elk will be dead there. And then when I open up the elk, absolutely the wound channel, like that is not the wound channel from these burgers is way more destructive from
Mm-hmm.
than what I've seen from other types of bullets, right? Um, Now, having said all that, all 15 of those are broadside bulls. Like they
Yeah,
were all broadside bulls shot that way because when I'm guiding, that's what I'm shoot dude, that's what we're gonna shoot at, right? I mean,
yeah.
it's like the problem is in all this stuff it gets very biased, right? And like I guess I'm showing you an example of something very biased because if somebody's hunting with me and they're a client. And nowadays, almost all my elk hunting clients, like I'm doing a mix of the old kind of hunts I used to hunt that were on wilderness that are pretty tough hunts. And then nowadays, I mean, I have a lot of like celebrity type of folks that I'm guiding, right? And
Mm-hmm.
they're newer hunters. So then I'm biased there because I got a newer hunter. Now they're so new that a lot of them are borrowing my rifle. So that's even more bias. And so
Yep.
if I've got that type of hunter, we're only shooting selective shots. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? So I guess it's hard. Like all I can say about the 15, this data set of 15 dead elk is that they're dead, and I was happy with it. I think if I'm being honest, though, I can't tell you if they're any greater, if they're better than other bullets that I've shot
Right.
You've
or
Right.
got to
It
not.
just
shoot
happens to be that. Right.
hundreds of
Yeah,
animals to be able to tell that. You can't do it off of a few. You
yeah,
know,
and you surely
I'll
can
give
have a
you kind of a
bias.
counterpoint to the expanding bullet, though, is that I don't know of any of the older and not too many of the newer professional hunters and avid resident hunters in Africa that hunt with anything other than a solid non-expanding bullet.
Right.
But then they don't shoot lung shots. They shoot to break bones.
Yeah, yeah,
You're
yeah.
talking about hunting the
That,
big nasties, though. You're talking about
well,
stuff
no,
that'll make you.
even hunting the little animals.
Hmm.
You know, a lot of them use nothing but solids.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And it, you know, if you're a decent shot, which most of them are from sheer number of animals they've shot, uh, you can do just fine with a solid. The classical example is W.D.M. Bell, the famous elephant hunter, who shot a ton of animals with various small calibers, probably the most with a 275 number two Rigby, or 275 Rigby, wasn't the number two. which is the 7x57 cartridge. And he made a quote in his book that the barrel of that rifle was never polluted by an expanding bullet.
Yeah. No, I've heard that from guys that hunt in Africa a lot too. That it's all, just solid bullets.
Well,
Nothing.
even when we had clients there that were hunting in areas where there were big game, I always had them keep a solid in the chamber. Their first round up, when they chambered a round, was a solid, because you didn't know what the next animal you were going to encounter was.
Yeah.
And it's although one tore up one of my knees, it's unlikely a kudu is going to kill you.
Yeah.
You've
No,
got
I got you.
time to change, but you jump a buffalo up on the opposite side of a termite mound, and you better have a solid in there.
Yeah, it's this is such an interesting conversation to me though, Ed, because like, and maybe I'm not following the fact pattern right, and it's like I'm just trying to figure. It's so weird how what seems to be a very similar application is differing like in the culture. So like if you talk to all the Alaskan guys nowadays,
Mm-hmm.
the guys that are, they're dealing with bears on a daily basis. It could be even the guy, I mean, the reality is the guys that are guiding fishermen are dealing with more brown
Yeah,
bears than
right.
anybody else. But anyway, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter. You talk to all these guys, and a lot of them are not shooting solids.
Yeah. Yeah. I
And
mean, it's a whole different culture, and in a lot of states, it's illegal to hunt with a non-expanding bullet.
right.
It's just the way some dumb laws get passed. You
Right,
know,
but
it,
the question I have, man, like from an empirical standpoint, is why are these questions why as hunters do we constantly go round and round with all these questions and not just like figure it out? And that's like the new norm.
well, you're never going to figure it out, because you've got industry involved. There is money out there advertising, particularly on, if you took bullets, on behalf of expanding bullets.
Right.
And I tested expanding bullets. And there's nobody out there lobbying for the old solid, but the
Right.
solid has killed a lot more game than expanding bullets has.
Yeah, but this is why I think this is why I get like, well, I call it, um, oh, what do I like? There's so much gear obsession, right? There's like this,
Yeah,
it's almost like gear masturbation. That's what I call it.
Oh
Like
yeah, no, it's
hunters
yeah.
get into
incredible.
this thing, and it feeds into the whole marketing machine in the hunting world. And I think it comes down to this fundamental issue, Ed, that like it's very difficult. It's very difficult for me to prove to you that a burger is an elk bullet or a burger is not an elk hunting bullet. It's almost impossible for me to prove that to you statistically, given like, what we face in terms of cost and the laws and all that stuff we've talked about. So the industry feeds off that because I can't prove you're wrong, which means that you can say whatever the hell you want,
Yeah,
even
yeah.
though
Oh
you
yeah, we're
can't
Yeah,
familiar
prove
with
that
that.
it's true. You know what
yeah.
I mean?
Of course, I'll get flack back now for this, but I don't care. Uh, the some of the bullets, well, the Sierra bullets, we wouldn't let our clients use. Had too many of them surface pop, not get deep enough penetration.
What do you mean by surface pop? They
It expanded
in the
within the
air.
first couple of inches of penetration completely to the point the bullet came apart.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
I've even seen that happen with 300 grain 375s.
Yeah. Just literally just like jelly for 3 inches.
Right, and that's
Yeah.
also a problem with penetration, is all the high velocity stuff you've got now. The monolithic bullets are helping with that. Of course, the old nozzle petitions helped with that too, but would allow you that. But one of the things we were doing a lot of testing on was uh, velocity and penetration. And the highest velocity or the highest penetration with rifle cartridges occurs when you have impact velocities below 2,500 feet per second. And that was just a redo of the testing that Dr. Frank Chamberlain did post World War II. Now, he was at the Aberdeen Proving Grounds, and he was shooting. The animal people would go nuts now. He was shooting live animals, donkeys, goats, and pigs. And
Sure.
looking at the cellular level, there is no such thing as hydrostatic shock until you exceed 2,500 feet per second, is what he
Okay.
got. Some people in newer testing are saying 24. I couldn't differentiate the two, but the testing that we did was with the 22 caliber rifles and then with the 30 caliber rifles. And I wrote all that up for Magnum Magazine in South Africa. And then Gregor Wood, who was their shooting editor at the time, went on to be editor of Magnum Magazine, repeated that with the big 45 caliber bullets on buffalo and elephant. And he came up with the same thing.
Yeah. What
The
you said?
highest penetration is below 2,500 feet per second impact velocity. And he was doing that all with solids in, shooting a 460 Weatherby, 458 Lot. And I think he had the common 458 at 458 in there.
You're saying that there's the higher penetration was if the impact took place at lower than 2,500 feet?
Yes, but below
Yeah.
the level of hydrostatic shock that Chamberlain was observing, because at that point, you're getting the fluid not being able to flow out from in front of the bullet fast enough. So you're getting a fluid dynamic pressure against the bullet, which is cutting down your penetration significantly. It's like, diving off a diving board or jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge.
I gotcha. So this is like popping up a bunch of questions in my mind.
Yeah,
So
right. No, hey, don't
yeah.
don't do this. Well, okay, we're done with the podcast. We're over. Let's stop now, Cliff. You're going to turn into a maniac.
Well, so yeah, but no, this is really interesting. So that I understand how you describe it. Now, the question of killing animals, what's better to hit them at higher hit them at the velocities above 2,500 feet per second, and have the hydrostatic shock, or the penetration that you get below?
Again, goes back to what you're trying to do. If you're going to be taking lung shots, I would tend to lean towards the high velocity, and I want a rapidly expanding bullet, but not too rapid. I don't want it to surface pop. I don't want that quick blow up. I want it to get inside the lungs.
Yeah, but once it gets in, if it rips open a channel that big, good to go. Yeah, I see.
But if you're taking the other type of shot, like everybody in Africa takes, they try to take out at least a shoulder. They prefer quartering shots where they take out a shoulder to hip.
Yeah.
And, they will do on buffalo a popular shot with African hunters. Is what they call the hump shot, which is actually a spine shot.
Oh, okay.
And so it's a high shoulder shot.
Yeah.
And you've got a lot of spine to shoot at if you've got a big enough gun with sufficient energy.
Yeah.
They've got dorsal processes as big as your hand.
So if you hit those wings, you're going to knock them down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the hump shot. I wasn't a fan of that. My favorite shot with solids was always the quartering shot. And when you're guiding people, I always carried solids, because the most common shot I got was an animal going flat out away from me.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So penetration was absolute essential.
Right. Yeah. Which
my dad taught me to shoot. If you're hunting horns, you shoot them in the upper. You shoot deer in the upper third and break them. We're not worried about the meat.
Yeah.
Like
you mean
a little bit above
like
center.
upper, like high shoulder shot.
Cut the deer in half and shoot the upper third
spine.
and anchor them. I don't want to chase them around if you're hunting horns. if you're hunting does or whatever or meat, they'll shoot them on the crease low and blow their lungs out and pick them up. But he
Sure.
said we hunted a few big ranches down in South Texas. One of them being the King, and when we were hunting down there, you weren't. This was not a. This is a horn situation.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
got you.
Anchor them, right? Anchor them.
Yeah. Um, it's funny. I mean, to me, it's just interesting that it's so different culturally, and then it changes a little bit. Because I mean, I used to hear that a lot more. That to take shoulder shots, and
Mm-hmm.
I still like. I mean, back to the whole goat thing. I tell guys to hit them in the shoulder with the
Yeah, yeah.
goat
They
because they
don't
just
make
Yeah,
them.
if you
They don't
hit him
want
in
to
the
run
shoulder
off.
with a
They don't.
decent bullet that holds together, he's down.
Yeah, and he's not going anywhere, and it's just like makes
Yeah.
life a lot easier. And is that why? Is that the Africa explanation too? Is this just like they're there? They're
Well,
like
you
they're
you've
not
got
going anywhere.
you've got two philosophies in Africa. One of them being that you can break the bones down and put him down right there. The Afrikaners that we always call biltong hunters love solace because they don't damage much meat. They can eat
Sure.
right up to the bullet hole.
Yeah.
You know, when we guided Afrikaners, they could care less about horn size.
Yeah.
All they wanted was how many pounds, how many kgs of meat
Yeah.
is
Just
in
meat
this
hunting.
animal.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
way they judge a trophy.
Yeah. 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 But dude, that's actually super interesting though, Ed, because I mean, that proves what I've seen. I mean, this is not probably interesting to you, but I don't think people realize like how much more damage, like they're like the gel, like a
Oh
bullet
yeah,
when a bullet only goes in, like doesn't exit or whatever, those, you lose all the mass, like it'll destroy a whole, like one of those burgers, when you hit them in the shoulder, on most animals, the close side shoulder's basically worthless. Like
yeah.
there's no, you know what I mean? Like the
Well,
meat's like it's
we've got these little teeny deer down here in Texas. And if you've ever shot any of these, like you're talking about broadside shots with a 220 Swift, that is one of they just don't move.
Mhm.
It's lightning death if you put it in the lungs because it invariably blows up in the lungs and just totally destroys them.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. No, that's the same thing I've noticed on
I was
on these.
surprised how much damage was done. So I've got one of Ed's rifles. I've got a 300 Savage. It was one of his test rifles. He gave it to me. It's stamped prototype one. So there's not another one
It's
on the
pretty cool.
planet. I had to learn to hand load, and I get these emails from this old guy that's on the podcast saying, I started reloading when I was 9. Get over it. This kind of shit. It's great.
No, I killed my first deer when I was 8 with a cartridge I loaded myself.
No, he was trying to help me, and I was just reloading is wild. You just got to keep your lens open. Like, don't think too much. If it shoots
Yeah,
crazy,
yeah.
it shoots crazy. I didn't accept that, but I ended up shooting a copper bullet called a hammer because there was not a 130 flat base Barnes bullet that he gave me the loadout, and the
Yeah,
bullets he gave me wouldn't
that
shoot.
rifle was built around with a 1 in 16 twist. It was built around 130 grain, flat base, all copper bullet.
But that bullet, that particular manufacturer said they want the pedals to come off the front, and then you basically have a wad cutter going
Right.
right behind it, right? I was shocked. The impact shoulder was destroyed on this deer. It was about a
Oh
110
yeah.
pound deer.
Yeah.
The impact
Oh,
shoulder was, no, excuse me, the exit shoulder. I'm wrong. There was a hole this big in the entry, and there was a hole this big on the exit. You couldn't tell. It wasn't like it didn't have a
Yep,
big
but
mushroom kind of
inside it
thing.
was
It
torn all to pieces.
the offside shoulder was completely destroyed.
yeah, yeah. Huh. Yeah, so I mean, so you had a bunch of expansion inside.
Well, no,
Right.
it blows the whole front end of the bullet.
Yeah, I got you. It just loses
Yep.
that part, and then you got yeah, yeah.
Yep.
And I do think I mean, like another topic to add to it is I do think there is part of this is like I have thought about this when I'm shooting these bullets that blow up like that, is that all that shit is going into the meat. You know what I mean? Like
Yes, you have to throw away a lot of meat because you're getting lead if you've
everywhere.
got a lead cord bullet,
Yeah.
or you've got metal of some kind out there in that meat.
Yeah, and it's weird, like as I, because a lot of times I'll actually, particularly if I'm packed in somewhere, I'll clean up the quarters really quick to get all the bloodshot shit off. So I'm not
Yeah.
hanging them with that on there, just so it doesn't, speed up any process for the meat to go
And
bad.
it cuts down on what you got to pack out too.
Yeah, that component too, for sure. I mean, if it's bad, I'm not gonna. Yeah, no, I'm totally with you. But what's amazing to me is like, sure, you find little shards of a bullet that is expanded, but really, when you're going through it, you realize that there's
You can
very
feel it.
yeah, but there's very small pieces.
Yep.
Yeah, there's very small pieces that are kind of hard to detect. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
And if it's a
So.
lead cord bullet, lead's not a good thing to be eating.
No, yeah. No, that's what I was getting at. Yeah,
You get
totally.
Mad Hatter's disease.
Yeah, it's not a good thing to be into, but it is an interesting thing. Um, but I guess it comes back to the whole archery question, and I guess one thing is I guess it relates to the elk hunting world is one argument that I've heard against the heavier arrow setup. So I guess the biggest con that I'll have the biggest con that I have personally with it, and that a lot of people will bring up to me is the trajectory differences in that 20 to 50 yard realm, right? It's like it is different that just the physics of it. There's wider pin gaps, you know, between a heavier arrow and a light arrow in that realm, right? So guys that are hunting elk and if they yeah, you might be able to get one range, but then, after that is the elk's in there close, you may not really be able to get another range, so you are ballparking I mean, you know what I'm getting at, right?
Yeah.
This is a negative of it. Um one argument is like, okay, but the pro is a more damaging arrow, an arrow that's going to get more penetration. One thing that pops in my mind is like that makes a lot of sense, but can I, if I have the right arrow set up, can I bet that I can get through the elk shoulder? Like, do you have an
Yes.
answer to that?
Well, you of course Troy will give you some of the stuff he's done with the Labdar of arrow degradation, of momentum and kinetic energy at distance. But when I was doing the heavy bone testing with various bows, using arrows that were around 724, 725 grain out of a 40-pound Bear Formula Silver recurve. And these things were about 26% FOC. I could get transthorax penetration on every shot.
Can you
Now,
describe
that had a launch velocity of 119 feet per second.
Can you describe or can you define that term you just used? The thor
Which one?
the the what you said?
Transthoracic.
Yeah, what does that mean?
Oh, it went completely across the thorax into the offside wall,
Oh, okay,
but it
gotcha.
didn't penetrate the offside wall.
I gotcha.
So
But
that would
even where it penetrated the offside wall would still be transthoracic. It traversed the entire thorax.
rib to rib. How's that?
Yeah, so they're dead. Yeah.
Yeah,
For
rib
us,
Yeah,
to
for
rib.
us
yeah,
rednecks, we're going rib to rib. The smart
yeah,
guy can
yeah.
sound smart.
No. I like the term. I just in my mind, I want to make sure that we're talking about. So basically, both lungs. So and that's at a much lower speed. You're saying
That's
there,
at
119.
119 feet per second.
right? Right.
Now,
So
there is not a compound out there that won't deliver that arrow at that velocity at 60 yards,
right now,
or
now
even a heavier arrow as far as that goes.
so what you're saying is that if I have a heavier arrow, like the quartering two shot, that I would, I won't take it, and I won't let anybody I'm guiding take a quartering two elk shot.
Only if they have the appropriate arrow set up.
But
If they have the appropriate arrow set up, you can take the quartering shot. And Jeremy's proved that. Oh, he for my 2 cents worth, is the best bow hunter in North America.
yeah,
Probably the best elk hunter, period. Yeah, I'm an elk hunter. He specializes in elk, but he goes to public land and pulls out these 300 plus elk every year out of two different states.
Right.
Phenomenal elk hunter, but he's a specialist on elk.
Right. Right.
And
He
you
shoots
know,
720 somewhere.
720 some odd grain, shooting a 70-pound bow, and he can break out the humerus and the femur, or the femur and the humerus. In other words, he can go diagonally through an elk with arrow exit
Yeah. So
and
scapula.
through the heaviest bones in their body.
Yeah, so like the ridge of the scapula, no problem. The knuckle underneath it, he can enter through the knuckle underneath it with that arrow setup and go through both lungs.
Yes,
Yeah. That, I
with
mean,
no
it,
trouble at all.
yeah, and the thing is that, and maybe I'm just naive, like I haven't researched this. I have no reason to not believe you,
But Jeremy, he and I just in the last 2 weeks have had a conversation about this, and he has lost a couple of elk with on broadside shots with high lung hits. And now Jeremy stayed with these elk for one of them for a full week and is still alive.
yeah. And he got, do you know if he got blood, he has blood or lung blood on the exit? Like he thinks it exited through like he got both lungs.
Oh yeah, he had passed through it, and he's got it on video too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It was funny. I gave him some broadheads that aren't made anymore. It's a 300 grain tough head. When he was here in Texas last year, we were doing a hunt with him, and I said, "Well, that'll be good you'll be good for the rest of your life." He said, "No, that's 6 elk because I lose them every time. I never get them back.
Yeah.
They go into canyon and
They,
disappear."
yep, they whistle down into the canyon after they go
Let's
through the elk.
but let's go back to the trajectory question real quick
Yeah.
because that's where you started.
Yes.
So
Talk
what
about
happens
the
is
difference in trajectory, the more parabolic,
Yeah,
the
and
more
I yeah,
perfect curve you get with the
I
heavier, which affects the penetration because of the angle of air impact.
yeah,
what
and so I'm sorry, go ahead, Troy.
no, it's fine. I've run the labrador out to 60. The energy's off the charts in support of heavier and heavier and heavier, perfect arrow flight, right broadheads, etc. It's an
Yeah.
algorithm. But what I have seen, I shoot a sight that has no pins. It's a speed-based sight. It's got a V in it, and it's actually based on the technology in World War II tanks. And the German tanks were a certain size, so they made this V that corresponded to the width of the tank, and they would just turn the knob until the tank was there, and it would go.
Oh, okay. They could kind of range
And it's
and
a
make
They
range
can
finder.
range it
adjustments.
with this
Yeah, yeah.
V.
Sure, I got you.
So there's a bunch of discs you can flip in and out of this thing. This is back when I'm still fiddling around. I'm shooting stuff with heavy arrows, but it's at 20 yards, so I don't have to range. I've got a 600 grain setup. This is 4 or 5 years ago. Perfect. I go to the 3D range I was shooting all the time, and I hadn't shot past 30 with it. I had to put a faster insert into the thing as if I was shooting a faster arrow, and I knew the velocity at launch. It was 245 feet per second.
Right.
I had to put a 260 foot per second V in there, but it was only good to 40.
Right.
And at 50, it started to fall out. And that's because the V was based on a lighter setup at launch. And all of a
Right.
sudden, don't do this, Cliff. I'm warning you. Y happens.
Yeah, well, because the shape of the curve is
So
different.
the curve
Yeah,
was more like this
right.
as opposed to that.
Yeah.
So the really light stuff from
Yeah, when they run out of
launch,
gas, they fall.
Yeah.
from
No,
launch
yeah,
to
and
about
that
50, and then
yeah,
all
and
of a sudden they go like this.
yeah, and I follow
But it's just like a light bullet and a heavy bullet at long range.
yeah,
Same,
yeah,
same difference.
I totally follow that. The only thing is like I guess it's not really a rebuttal, but my thought on it is where it matters for most of the elk shots that I deal with from, 10 yards to 50 yards, there's still quite a bit of difference between the two
Once you
trajectory
get used
wise.
to, so what I think it's
Well,
like everything, and the problem I
I
have
told Troy
is,
today he's got to do a video on that with the
yeah,
shooting machine.
I've got a energy video coming up too. But I used to shoot. I remember when my compound was shooting 240, and it was the fastest thing on the planet with an overdraw.
Right.
And
Yeah, I remember when there wasn't compounds.
yeah, right. So we learned to judge. This is before rangefinders too, right? So I actually made a video on this, and I said what you do with whatever setup you've got, you go to your 3D range, you laser a target, and you walk back a random set of steps, and you practice holding off. And I think that's an old thing we used to do all the time.
Right.
We used to do it for shits and giggles and make fun of each other. Like you'd get kicked in the ass if you missed. That was your punishment. Like you
Yeah,
missed,
sure.
you just bend over and everybody kicks you in the ass and you keep going, right?
Right.
Uphill, downhill, all that stuff. And I don't think a lot of people practice. I think practice people shoot a. You see a lot of posts and stuff, and there's always a flat piece of ground in a perfect situation in flip flops, smoking cigarettes with your friends.
Right.
And people don't go out in the wind or on a foggy day and go shoot angles.
Sure.
So my argument for that is your brain is damned amazing.
Oh,
It works
yeah.
faster than you can
You're
think.
faster. You don't realize how good you can make yourself if you practice correctly. And I'll give
Yeah.
you
Yeah. Well,
a friend of mine was hunting with Steve Chappell, and he was shooting 550. I think he was shooting my broadhead, but it doesn't matter. 200 grain single bevel, and he had a bull coming at 20, and he didn't think it was the right bull. He had an Arizona one. You know, you don't get those tags, right?
yeah. So he's questioning if it's like a shooter or not.
And he's on camera and all that stuff because Steve
Yeah.
was camera. And the guy goes, "What are you doing?" And he goes, "Is that the right one?" And this, yeah.
Yeah. Shoot
Well,
it.
it ran, and he didn't
Yeah.
have time to re-laser it, but he had been just walk back practicing in his backyard with no
Yeah.
rangefinder. He kind of knew how far stuff was, but didn't know, right?
Sure.
He said it was about 35. He held off and sent it, hit a little low, broke the offside humerus, cut the heart in half, 47 yards, and the elk was on the ground. So he missed, right?
Yeah.
But he had this upgraded setup and snapped the humerus on the other side. It didn't exit, but it was in 15 pieces. So I just,
I don't. I
I'm
don't.
going to do a video on that. People need to practice realistically, in my opinion, with
Well,
whatever you
yeah.
got.
No,
You know?
I like so that concept, Troy, I totally agree with. Like you shouldn't have to you shouldn't ha be so dependent on a rangefinder that you're literally like I mean
Yeah.
I see this when I'm guiding guys. Like literally guys are so dependent on it that the bull has taken one step and they're like back moving. Then you got
The
an elk
tough
like
thing with
right,
elk is
But
you don't hunt a lot of flat country. So that's a whole other shit show.
yeah, like angles. Yeah.
30 yards downhill, he's
Yeah.
going up.
Well, so yeah, and I totally agree, man. Like guys should not basically what we're talking about is they should be able to not be totally dependent on their angle compensating rangefinder.
Mm-hmm.
I totally agree, and they need to practice that. And I think actually what hurts guys a lot on this front
They're
is
spending a lot of time with it and they don't get the shot.
well, the other thing is year to year or every couple years, these guys that don't get to hunt a tremendous amount and they're limited in time just because of life and everything else,
Mm-hmm.
they're changing their bow and arrow setups
Yeah,
all the
yeah,
time
yeah, yeah,
too.
yeah.
So they don't have an intuitive sense of ranges. Like
I've
I've
got
got
one bow for over 20 years. Of course,
yeah, so
I shoot
you
instinctive.
yeah, so
And then,
you know
yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah. And that bow, I took over 300 total animals with that bow and never lost a single animal.
Right. Yeah, which is stunning, man.
But of course, none of my shots were at long range. You know,
Yeah.
I close range. My average shot, which I actually tracked across those last 631 animals, is 15.97 yards.
Right. But you're also saying that you had no problem crushing bone on the entry.
None at all.
Yeah, so this is what I'm getting at, Troy. Like I'm just trying to like bring it back into the context of elk hunting is I totally agree with you that we in an ideal scenario, we should be less dependent on rangefinders. We should practice in real world situations. I guess the question that a lot of elk hunters are going to ask is like, totally agree with that. But if I don't have an arrow, if I don't have a pro in the heavier arrow, like let's say I'm shooting a 400, let's say I'm shooting a 450 grain arrow right now, 100 grain head,
Yeah, sure.
you see this a
Normal
lot.
stuff.
And
Yep.
the alternative is I'm going to bump up to 600 grains, right? And like get into your guys' world. So I'm thinking to myself, like, I don't want to give up the trajectory component of it because regardless of where I'm at in the practicing and my intuition,
Hmm.
I am giving up something a little bit because now I've got to there's a more variable there, right? I have to know that all of a sudden, now that I'm at the heavier arrow setup, I have more varied shots I can take, or if my shots are just off a little bit, it's more forgiving. Like if I do hit the shoulder, it's going to go through
Yes.
you know, kill. So that is the thing that, and this could be like, you guys might be like, yeah, that's the whole point of what we're
No,
studying.
you're tracking perfectly, and
But the, pro- but the,
I'll
pro-
layer on top. Yep.
yeah, but the problem, Troy, is like, I want to see it on elk, dude. Like I want to see 10 elk get pounded through the quartering two shot, and I want to see an arrow go through the shoulder, come out, the far lung or hit or even just embed in the rib cage or just the arrow stuck in the
Well,
far lung and the elk dead. Where is it?
the easy way to do that is do like I did in the testing, but you need to do it within 30 minutes of putting the animal down. Put him positioned with his legs folded so his body is up. Take some test shots. And from the data I've got, you know that you're going to get at least as much and likely more penetration on a live animal than you do on this setup shot. But
Right.
if you just want to look at will he get through the bone, put him up there, prop him up, and shoot him and find out. You're not tearing up any meat with an arrow. It's not like shooting him with a bullet.
Right. And
I
just
encourage people to do that in their for their own knowledge. Is not
yeah.
only look at what their era did and what the animal did to their era, but take the opportunity to take some test shots when you kill an animal.
Sure.
I've
And
been
I'm
pretty
not, and just so
surprised with when I started aggressively shooting pigs, but I had all the components. So Ed has a 12 factor arrow. It's now an 11 factor arrow, but because the
yeah, I
parallel
got you.
shaft is now proving to be just as efficient as the tapered shaft on a compound. So that aside, when I built the full on, I got one right here. This one's all glued and screwed together with the long 3-to-1 head. I started shooting pigs right here, and all you hear is chut.
Yeah, it's not a loud sound. It's just a
And
snick.
it's
Yeah.
gone. And the first two or three I did that to, I was like, that is insane. And Cliff, to your point, it's a completely different experience. And it's hard to believe.
Yeah, yeah,
And so
no,
I did it like, I mean, it's just like,
and that's the thing, Troy, is like and just so you know too, Dr. Ashby, like I'm not questioning your research or
yeah,
anything
sure,
like
we know
else like
that.
that. Like I read and I'm like, well, yeah, it makes sense. He shot through animals that are just as big as elk, if not bigger. And through the bone, and he's confident. It makes sense. I just I guess I think there's like a little bit of a gap. I wish I maybe it's something that I need to think about doing or whatever. I wish somebody would do it with elk and like literally just show it because I'm like, in my mind, I'm thinking like that would take a lot of the ammo against the idea. You know what I mean? Because basically, a lot of people are saying like, hey, okay, Cliff, you can change that to that heavy arrow or whatever, but you're still not going to get through an elk shoulder. That's what I mean,
That's the general
that's
consensus.
what
Hey,
I
The,
hear.
we
But you're
have all
a
saying that's wrong.
suggestion.
the headwinds are too strong, Cliff. It's not going to be done.
Do me a
Yeah.
favor, which I'm sure you probably don't have a copy of it. Get a copy of Jeremy Johnson's book, Can't Lose Bow Hunting. And like I
Okay.
said, he is an elk specialist. And it's the one book that I think every bow hunter should read.
It's called, what is it called?
Can't Lose Bow Hunting.
Can't lose
It's
bow hunting.
available on Amazon.
I'll check it out.
It is a good read. It's A to Z. It's designed for everything from an experienced bow hunter to a new beginner.
Yeah.
Cliff,
Yeah,
one
no,
of the things
I'll
that
check
was
it out.
overwhelming, and this is 2 years ago, I didn't have a Labrador. And the foundation bought one, and I have it right here, and we all just move it around.
We bought three, I think.
Well, I have one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you got one.
So I did a study, and I've posted it on my YouTube channel at zero, momentum at zero, and momentum at 60 yards to just for this topic.
sure.
I think most people think they may shoot 50 or 60 in an elk, and I see a lot of 15 yarders that they won't take because it's the wrong position. Fair enough.
Yeah.
So I walked the arrows up. It started at 388 and ended up at 715. That's that arrow I just showed you. This arrow. And there's 6 arrows in the subset, and I spined them different, and I got them to fly, so they're not perfectly spaced for like 50 grains. Because if you don't maintain arrow flight, it'll skew the results.
Got to have that.
Yeah.
As a simple example, in the lower arrow category, lower mass, the data shows that a 436 grain arrow at launch, a 514 grain arrow at 60 yards has exactly the same momentum as a 436 grain at the bow. So that means at the target, it has the same momentum that the lighter arrow had at the bow.
Right.
And it's going down from there. And I didn't know that. A guy I met said, "Dude, let's try this and see what comes out of it."
Sure.
Because it's just math. If it's not that, it's something else, right?
Right.
And that curve is like this: mass here, our arrow mass here, and the momentum just keeps going up.
Right.
So what I struggle with in this argument or whatever, and I've said this to 1,000 people, and it's one of the reasons I get a lot of hate. A 243 is an adequate whitetail deer rifle up to pronghorn and short mule deer shots, like 100 yards, okay? Above that, most grown-ass men buy a real rifle,
Right.
a Western rifle, right? At
Yeah.
least 28 caliber, and 30 sure helps.
Yeah.
They don't do that with arrows.
Right.
They have an arrow that they have decided for the speed and the trajectory, whatever that means, is the arrow that's perfect for penetration. And they're not the same topic.
Right.
That's where, once, as much as I've done this, that's where Ed caused problems.
Well, yeah, but I think
He
it's the
studied
same.
impact.
Right, but it's like I think the reason why people get stuck on it and they don't go from a lighter arrow to a heavier arrow is they it's almost like with rifles. I get the analogy, but it's like, okay, more power, different trajectory, maybe, all of that stuff is good in a continuous sense. But most people that are archery elk hunting, they think of it binary. Okay, it is the arrow enough to go through a broadside shot, through one set of, entry on this rib cage, hit the other rib cage. Because if it does that, the elk is dead. But then they think, I don't need more unless I can break their shoulder. And that's impossible. Right? So it's almost like they
Oh,
think
wow.
of
You
it.
think it's that drastic, right? You think it's
No,
that.
I think it's more of like a binary thought
No
process.
kidding.
No,
I never thought of it like that.
yeah, like to me, that's what it is. It's not that people don't agree with the physics, that there's more juice at further yardage with a heavier arrow. It's just they're thinking it doesn't matter because I still can't break the shoulder. Like so, because the thing, and this is why I dwell on this, and maybe I'm keeping it very basic in my own mind. But in my mind, it's like, okay, if I personally could be convinced that myself or a client was shooting an arrow that could go through the knuckle of the shoulder of a bull elk consistently,
Mhm.
it would be it'd be like a massive game changer because, well, lots of reasons, and I guess it ties back to something Ed said really early on, and he said that lack of penetration was the reason for a lot of, or for the majority of the animals not being recovered.
Mhm.
What I find with elk is it's actually, I mean, maybe there's a, there's a lot of shots that aren't that are a penetration issue that we don't find the elk, but a lot of times what I see is that the arrow exits behind one of the lungs
Yeah.
because of the angle the bull is in.
Hmm.
Like a lot of the bulls, when I videoed bulls, like I had one this year, we videoed the bull. I saw the arrow go in, and I thought, I mean, I have a video of this bull from like 10, like 15 yards, right? And I saw the arrow go in, and I was like, we're finding that bull. He's going to be dead right here, right? And then I tracked him for 100 yards, found a little pool of blood, and was like, oh shit, like I got to like
Hmm.
reassess things. Went back to the video, and I could see the arrow fully exit on the far side, but it was further back. And then I look at the bull's legs. I realize he's quartering to us more than he is. And that is like a really common scenario. And a lot of people will just shoot back because they're afraid of the shoulder or whatever,
Well, they
or
should
they
be.
yeah, or they misjudge the angle of the bull. But if everybody was can or if you would if I was confident I could shoot through the shoulder of the bull, there'd be less of that because I would tell clients to shoot further forward. And they would actually. That's the thing is like I still tell people to shoot way further forward than they
Most
think
people,
they
yeah.
should, but they still migrate back to the crease. And a lot of guys will hit the crease on a bull elk, and you won't find the bull because
Yeah,
the bull is quartered to you a little bit.
yeah,
Does that?
I
that's
think
been
so.
pushed for
You've kind of,
decades. That shoot, you know, stay away from the shoulder. You can't get through it.
Yeah, it's like ingrained in the culture.
Yeah,
I
Yeah,
also
and
think
that's
there's a,
because that's been pushed.
I also, I blame 3D somewhat for this as well. I have multiple people come hunt with me. I have a couple of people who have belts from winning 3D tournaments statewide and all that stuff. And
sure.
it's 17 yards. I've got a guy who's 1 for 4
On pigs.
on pigs at a
Yeah,
damn deer feeder.
yeah,
Everybody laughs at me. My average hunter is below 50% at 17 yards.
yeah. Well, yeah. It doesn't surprise me, unfortunately.
You
And,
don't
and
even
is
have
it
to, you just sit there and wait. I mean, you don't have to rush it. Elk hunting, like, it's going to happen and soon it's going to be over.
right?
One of those big
Yeah,
boars comes in, starts eating.
You got
He's
all the time in the
convinced he's
world.
right. You can just
Yeah,
wait. And
yeah.
I,
But the
I'll give
thing,
you.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'll give you one other big advantage and I'm not a fan of long shots. I want to get as close to that animal as I can. I want to see,
Sure.
his eyelashes. But if you will look at the sight pin settings on your hunter's bows, if they're shooting a light arrow, as they get out at longer ranges, the gap between their pins gets bigger and bigger. That's because of that rapid drop
Sure.
falling off of the light arrow, losing its velocity out there. And if you're ranging them with a rangefinder and know the distance, but you don't have a pin for that exact distance, you're going to bracket him.
still holding
Right.
off.
Your
Yeah.
pin gaps on a heavy arrow are virtually identical
Yeah, out at those
out at
distances, sure.
distance. It's just the same as they are up close. So
Yeah,
you're bracketing for unknown ranges in between where your pins are set is much easier to do
right, with the heavier
with the
arrows.
heavier arrow.
It's like that
Yeah.
Bryson DeChambeau guy on the PGA Tour. All of his irons are 5 iron length. He's the only guy on
Yeah,
tour that does that. It's one of the crappy
yeah.
things about golf. All the damn clubs are a different length.
Yeah. No, no, I get that logic. That I think the problem for me personally, Ed, is that I'm very old school in the sense that unless I have some extenuating like information about an archer I'm guiding, we're not shooting at a bull further than 40,
Yeah.
45
Well, we
yards.
Yeah,
did
good
that
for
in
you.
Africa too. We wouldn't let people shoot with rifles, shoot Cape Buffalo beyond 60 yards.
Yeah, it's just not worth the variability. I mean, it's a totally different conversation, but I think it's also like a very biased set of data that we all consume out there. I I hate to say it, but I think you only hear about the bulls that were recovered that were shot at 60, 70 yards. You don't hear about, I mean, you just don't hear about the guys that
Nobody,
fling
yeah.
one at 75 yards and it's sticking this far out of the bull's back and the bull just walks off. You just
Yeah,
don't hear
yeah.
about it.
My favorite saying is the animal gets the vote.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
he can take a leisurely step at 70 or 60 or 70 yards, and you can hit him in the gut or the hip
Horrible
or
spot. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. No, for sure. But
The
One
back to
more
flight
the
thing I
time
want to
is just
ask
too
you, Cliff,
long.
because you're an interesting guy to spin this off of. If you have an arrow, let's say we have the magic arrow at 700 grains and it's going to blast through anything on a bull elk. Is it more forgiving or less forgiving than an arrow that is lighter and can't break the shoulder?
well, I mean, it would be if the arrow can break the shoulder, it's more forgiving in the sense of where I would tell guys to shoot. I'm kind of like thinking out loud here
Mm-hmm.
because if like where I tell to get, I always tell guys like basically to hug that triangle,
Yeah,
right? Because even me, like I over the years, Troy, I've realized that elk, well, all animals, because it's got to be a psychological thing, but when we observe them, if they're not looking straight at us, they're broadside. Like
yeah,
if you
yeah,
take a
yeah, yeah.
hunter,
No, there's no
like
doubt about that.
yeah, like if
Yeah,
you take
all of our animals are that way.
yeah, like if you take, a hunter and it could be like across the spectrum, a guy, I mean, you could be guiding freaking Jim Shockey or a guy who's brand new, but he's consumed, you're consumed some hunting material. You never, I mean, if you're like, hey, what position is that animal in? It's either like he's looking at us or broadside. There's no in between. You
Yeah,
know
there
what I
isn't.
mean? But
There's no
but
nuance.
the reality is 99% of the time they're not perfectly broadside. You know what I mean? And so, particularly when they're feeding, like when I notice elk feeding, like one step, parallel to their track is like quite a bit of angle. You know what I mean?
I
So I'm,
lost the. I posted a video of losing a pig at 17 yards because of that exact thing.
yeah, like that, just like the drift to the
And
side.
it was, I had set myself up in a terrible spot, and there was only one place where I could get the pig in the camera.
Right, I
So
gotcha.
I'm waiting and
Yep.
waiting and waiting. And he finally feeds around,
Yeah.
and I'm trying to get the camera to work, and it will not record. I'm like, I'm tapping on it, and it won't go.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I see the pig, and he's broadside, and I look up, and I hit play. I'm looking, and it was running long enough that I saw on the camera he was broadside, and he went. I mean, he took
Yeah,
all
yeah,
he did was
tiny.
ate one piece of corn a foot to the right, and
Yeah,
my head said broadside.
right.
I smashed him right on the crease. Well, their lungs are real short, tall.
Sure.
Out the guts,
Yeah, missed
never
one of
found
them.
it. And it was
Yeah.
just because I don't know that I would have made, to your point, I might not have made the adjustment if I'd have seen him do it. I
Right,
might have
yeah,
been
yeah.
mentally locked and said,
Yeah.
he's good, right? When I
Yeah.
needed to shoot him here.
Yeah, but the thing that's interesting though is like when I'm rifle hunting with the guy, I'll actually use the point because you can see the point of, even in like December, if you're bull elk hunting, you can see the pointer of their shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll have guys shoot quartering two bulls with a rifle all day long. Like I
Yeah, yeah,
love
yeah.
that shit because I know they're gonna be there, right?
Yeah,
And
flop.
I'll literally be like, hey, you know, freaking half inch left of that point of his shoulder, or just shoot him in the point of the shoulder. Like who
Mm-hmm.
cares? You know what I mean? And
Yep.
so, um, in that case, the mental like picture is a lot different because you literally can see that point. But there's something about the crease of the animal, Troy, like with broadside, that
Mm-hmm.
like it's fluctuating so much. And I guess I'm getting off on another thing here, but it's like animals were particularly when they're feeding, they curl, they put a leg back, they put it to the side, whatever. And this like
Mm-hmm.
this area where people aim is always moving. And
It
then
is.
the path is very the path is the angle of the path of the arrow or the projectile is also moving too with that, with this picture. um so I guess back to your original question, an arrow that could go through an elk shoulder to me would be massively more forgiving because if I knew guys were shooting that, I would have them shoot it like a rifle, like right off the point of the shoulder if a bull
Well,
was.
that's what I
On
was
that
telling you
corner
that
two
I
shot.
do. I shoot right up at the point of the triangle.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
That's where I aim with an arrow.
Yeah. And because if like I mean if the animal's head is to your right, if you miss to the right by an inch, you're not worried about it.
Yeah.
You're gonna hit bone and clip both lungs and they're dead, or go right through both lungs and they're dead. Um, yeah, so in that sense, it's more forgiving. I think a lot of people view it differently because they're shooting back further, right? Which is, I guess, that's a mistake that is independent of this conversation. But they're doing that, and then they're worried about trajectory, right? Like they're
Somewhat so on ungulates, especially the hoofed animals, probably all of them, but elk and etc. Um, everybody thinks that the lungs are like this.
right.
They're like that.
Yeah,
Okay, this would be the elbow. This is the stomach.
right.
Diaphragm is going to be in between, like a window. It's a
Yeah, and the
drum head.
liver's laying in there
And the liver's
somewhere.
in here too, and it's on the
Yeah,
passenger side,
yeah,
physiologically anyway, because the stomach's over here, head's this way. The lungs are actually shaped like that. So when you go from here, this is all your surface area, and you go back here, you've now introduced an error into a low hit or back a little further. That's lung, gut,
yeah.
and you probably know this. There's 5 lobes on everything but a pig. God
On the
just
lungs.
decided to throw a 6th little lung into pigs just to make them special. This little tiny thing right in the middle is about the size of a walnut. But the further back you go, it's not less lethal. It just has more of an opportunity to collapse one lobe, and 4 are still going for a longer period of time.
Sure.
And if they're hauling ass, elk have long ass legs. I don't have any experience with them.
Yeah.
I just looked at them. And
Yeah,
Well,
they're
yeah.
there's
buck,
blood
right?
flow in the back of the lungs too.
Yeah.
You said
That
there's
increases
less
the bleed out time.
blood flow, you said, Ed?
Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah.
And then
yeah.
there's
Your larger blood vessels are in the front of the lungs.
Yeah.
also I'm going to do another video on this. A lung is more like a sponge than it is a balloon. I'm going to get a sponge. Hang on.
Yeah, go for it.
Where's SpongeBob?
Well, SpongeBob's back there. But, so if you imagine a sponge, I'm a respiratory therapist and I had a cadaver for 6 months, so I'm supposed to keep you alive. So then I know how to kill you too.
Sure.
So inside of a sponge all would be filled with blood if I could fill it with liquid and it didn't leak. Air and blood. Okay?
Yeah.
When the arrow penetrates and comes out, the blood in the lung is going to take up all the air space. It doesn't just shoot out.
I
There
got
are
you.
millions of airways in here that fill with liquid. And the lung also doesn't miraculously become a third of its
It's not
normal
a
size.
balloon.
They get a thing called atelectasis, where the airways just slowly collapse all over the whole thing.
So they're collapsing as they fill with the fluid.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's both. Okay.
Yeah.
But they don't disappear like this. They just become way less efficient. And the superstructure of the actual tissues doesn't allow it to disappear. So people think it just goes pop.
Right.
That's absolutely untrue. And then, so if you think about it like a sponge, when you cut it and the blood goes, there's all these airways in here. Blood's just going to go all in there, wherever it wants to go.
Sure.
And occasionally it's going to blow out. So, got rear lung, you'd have one up front. If you collapse this one's going.
Right.
You collapse this one, not necessarily going to collapse the front it has the opportunity through the airway to collapse like this and shut off, and the front's doing okay.
I gotcha.
I'm not saying it's not lethal. It's just
They could get some distance.
they could truck. They
Yeah.
can truck. And so that's I'm going to do another video. I've done this before, but it helps people understand that it doesn't disappear and there's a ton of space for whatever amount of water this thing can hold. Once you penetrate that, the blood is doing the same thing as actually dunking it. It's staying
Right.
in the lung. So
Yeah.
that's why also on the blood trail thing, it isn't always a miraculous, blood trail.
Right. Yeah. If you and you mean if you get an arrow on the further back lobes of the
Right.
right. I
It's
gotcha.
completely unpredictable, but a lot of people say you want two holes for a blood trail. That's absolutely untrue. You want two holes and you want the arrow through the animal because you want what's called a bilateral pneumothorax. And that is where the arrow passes through. There are holes in both sides. When they inhale, they suck air from the atmosphere into their chest.
Between the
They get
chest
trapped in
wall
there
and the lungs.
and it
Right.
starts pressing on the heart and everything. Not to mention
And
it collapses the lungs.
yeah, it
But
kills them. It kills them quicker.
you can get air inside of your chest. You've seen there's some movie about a bomb guy and he had a spontaneous pneumothorax and they stuck a needle in him and they had a stopcock on it and he would start to go into cardiac arrest and they'd turn the knob and let the air out of his chest.
Yeah.
You can actually get a pneumothorax by running into walls and stuff and not have a hole in your body.
Sure.
And so it actually puts pressure on all the organs. It's a
Right.
We could spend another 3.5 hours, and we've been going way too long on that. But the physiology of it is so unpredictable that your best possible impact point is the front lobes and the major arteries low and forward. That's just you could talk to every ER doc on the planet.
Yeah, yeah, sure. All the vascular stuff around
The
the
medical
heart, and
guys are
then the
not going to
forward of
argue
the
this. They're not going to
right.
argue it at all. And
Yeah.
so it just gets wild. But that's primarily why you want this heavier arrow platform, even if it's 550 or if you want the arrow to go through like they're not there.
Right.
I mean, zip. You have this secondary pneumothorax component. It's completely undiscussed. It's one of the reasons why there's a lot of hate because I say stuff like that and there's no rebuttal to that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, I mean there's yeah, I mean well one, I mean I don't know enough about it to have a rebuttal. I guess the only thing that in my mind it comes back to a little bit is like how extreme is it? You know what I mean? Troy, like it kind of comes back to the same thought process I guess I have is like, are we talking about bulls on average are going to go 20 yards further? I don't really care. You know
Yeah,
what I
right.
mean? Now, if they're going to go another 150 yards, I care a lot. You know
Yeah,
what I
yeah, of
mean? Just
course.
because,
Especially if they're not bleeding, that's a longer day, right?
yeah,
That's a
yeah,
longer
sure.
day.
Yeah, or like not find it. And I mean, it would be getting off topic, but I would love to hear like Ed's perspective on that. I don't think people realize there's like on elk, there's anybody who's tracked a bunch of archery hit elk, they know there's like a certain, if you've tracked enough of them, there's this moment while you're tracking them where I always keep a positive attitude, but there's a moment in my mind because I'm always doing the probability, and there's like this point where I'm like, we're fucked. Most likely we're fucked. You know what I mean? Like we're not gonna find this bull. You know
80
what I
yards
mean?
on pigs.
Yeah, you kind of have yeah.
When I
On
get
elk,
80 yards, even if they're bleeding,
yeah.
that's when I say they're
Say
gone.
I like the same deal. Like I get to like 160, 180 yards on elk. I'm like, whew, this this is not good. You know what I mean? Um,
Did you
and
see something like that, Ed?
Hmm?
When you were guiding, did you see something like that where your
Oh,
radar went off?
absolutely. And that even happens with the most skilled of the African trackers.
That's what I was gonna ask. Is like the guys that because I've never been there, Ed, but I have this. I hold up like the whole African tracking thing is like way up on a pedestal.
Oh, it is
Yeah, they're
compared to people here.
Right. I mean, what I guess two questions, man, not to get totally off on that, but what's the big difference? And then it like I guess is there a point where I mean, I never hear about them losing animals, but they obviously
Oh
do.
yeah, yeah, they lose
Um,
them.
like what is like what's the is it are they able to track a lot of animals 500-600 yards and then they lose them or like what does
Oh,
that all look?
they can track them for kilometers sometimes. They
Yeah,
don't track just by blood trail,
right.
and they also are mentally tracking the animal. Uh, my very first hunt over there, uh, I had some Hornady 300 grain bullets, surface pop, blow up on an eland, and we tracked him till dark. And I shot him in the morning, late morning, and we left him. Came back the next day, and a whole herd, and there were big herds back then. Eland had come through, and we couldn't find the track for the longest. And then old Fair and Yika found a track about 300 yards from where we had lost the trail. And he said, "That's our bull."
Huh.
And he started tracking it just by the tracks of the dust. And sure enough, we jumped it up. And I finished it off with a solid in a 375. And and Gordon, who was my guide, hit it with his 458 in the left hind foot. And Gordon, not you remember this, you can use it sometime, not to be put down, said, "Oh, I was just trying to slow it down for you. You know how hard it is to hit a moving hoof?
I
You
like
could
it.
never put one over on him."
I like it. That's funny.
All right,
But
well, we've been going for almost 2 hours. Everybody's pretty sane here, and I really appreciate everybody's time. Cliff, this has been great, man. I
yeah, dude,
Fabulous.
I for
appreciate
me
you. You're
for me too, man.
you're you're an incredible guest because you you're not you're all over the places, and that's a good thing. I mean, it's rounded, right? It takes in a lot of stuff, and then your background with all the rifles is. I would have never guessed the burger thing, but now it makes sense. See, that's one of those things I would have said, no, no way, don't do that. But the way you explain it makes total sense. They can't jump off the cliff; they're gone, or
Yeah.
it's a hell of a long day.
I mean, that's another long debate though. I mean, all these things are ever, just like you can get into massively long conversations with it. I mean, the thing that's crazy to me about all this stuff, Troy, is that, and it comes back to what we talked about earlier, like people being so upset about just, I guess, your content in general, is at a bare minimum, you got to understand like the pros and cons of all this stuff
Mm-hmm.
to make a decision, which I don't see why that's offensive to people.
We don't, and to reiterate on something we've said about 15 times, we don't know the answers. The best answer Ed asked me, I'll close on this. I was pondering before I met Ed, the first day I ever met Ed. I said, is there a velocity based heavy bone threshold because the compounds go faster? This is the argument that Ed shot a trad bone, none of that shit matters. This is the modern era. The physics is all new and Newton's an idiot. Okay? And I've stolen this from Ed. It's the greatest answer in the world. What Ed Ashby should have said is, I shot 2 rhinos, shut your face. I know everything. Ed did not say that. Ed said, I don't know. We've got to test that. And we've done
Sure.
it. It's a beautiful answer because if you're a keyboard warrior, Ed just goes on every freaking message board out there and says, I shot 2 rhinos. You guys are idiots. See you later.
Right.
Out of here. Turning off my membership. But he's not. And unfortunately for us, he's got a big list of crap we got to do.
Figure out. No, that's a good thing. That's what makes it fun though.
It's
You know what I
really
mean?
been a lot of fun to fart around with it. And, coming up with the idea of leveraging the pigs. So I got a hunting situation. I can get them there a lot. I can do a lot of things.
Sure.
It's super fun. So for all the, flack I get, That's why I don't go. I tend to stay off all the social stuff, except for
Sure.
my limited things, or it would just be a nightmare. I'd be a basket case, right? And I just keep testing stuff and keep finding
Yeah, well,
friends. It's a lot
I
of
mean,
fun.
you have a lot of fans too, man. I think that's what they appreciate is like the actual the data, kind of the more solid data set you're putting out there. For better or worse, Troy, there's so many guys, and I understand where they're coming from because I'm in the same boat personally. As a guy that's done a lot of,
Yeah,
elk
right.
hunting, it's still it's hard, and maybe it's just like an ego check for people. Hey, if you've killed 20 bull elk with your
Yeah, right.
bow,
Of course. Of
but
course.
if you've killed 20 bull elk with your bow, but in all different scenarios and with different bows over the last 20 years and different arrow setups, you can't really draw that conclusions.
Right.
I hate to say it, but you can't really. I mean, it goes back to like the 15 bulls with burger bullets. It's like I could say like they're the best. 100% of the time they kill their perfect shot, like they're the best bullet for elk. But then I have to be honest with myself with just like an ego check. It's like, well, they're good in that scenario. That's all I can tell you.
Well, that's the beautiful thing about what you allowed yourself to tell us that you have caveats because everybody,
Right.
the people that take shots will say, "Oh, that stuff doesn't work," and you were very specific. You said, "I'm okay with my guns, the burger bullets, and no long, long, long shots." And
Right.
what was the other thing?
No,
Clients
just
only
Broadside.
take
perfectly broadside.
broadside
Yeah, yeah.
shots.
Right.
Okay, like you've defined a box to live in. Yes, it
Right.
succeeds, right? It's awesome. That's what I love about you. I kind of knew this would go this way from our podcast. I really, really appreciate you and thank you for your time today, man. It's been awesome.
Yeah,
No,
thank
it has
you
been a
guys.
fabulous conversation. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it was great to meet you, Ed. I really appreciate it, Dr. Ashby. Hey, I got one question for you though, man. What kind of cigars do you smoke?
Cheap ones?
That's my kind of answer, man. You could just leave it at that. My kind of answer.
Y'all have a great day.
Thanks, guys.
You too.